What if the most powerful law enforcement figure in America accused 2 elected congresswomen of treason live on national television without presenting a shred of public evidence? What if their only crime was speaking too loudly for too many people? This isn't fiction. This isn't politics as usual. This is the moment where fear became strategy and truth fought back in the dark. If you believe the American people deserve more than headlines and silence, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below. Truth doesn't flinch. And don't forget to share this video, because if we don't talk about this, who will? Your voice is part of this story. Make it count. The clock struck 8:00 p.m. Face Off went live coast to coast. A nation tuned in not knowing they were about to witness the most explosive moment in the show's history. The lights inside the studio dimmed, leaving a single piercing beam above the center stage. 3 figures sat beneath it like opponents in a trial by fire. On the left, FBI Director Kash Patel, face unreadable. To the right, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, stiff-backed and battle-ready. Beside her, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, eyes locked forward, every muscle tensed beneath her calm exterior. And at the center, host Vanessa Hart, expression composed but unmistakably steeled for conflict. The theme music faded. Silence fell. No laughter. No pleasantries. Just a moment, frozen in time. Vanessa Hart's voice cut through the air, crisp and unwavering. Welcome to Face Off, where power meets accountability, and silence is not an option. Then, without warning, without build-up, Kash Patel leaned forward. His voice was flat. No drama, no inflection, which only made the words land harder. We have evidence suggesting leaks of national intelligence from inside Congress linked directly to members at this very table. For one breathless second, nothing moved. Then the room exploded. A gasp rippled through the audience like a shockwave. Behind the cameras, producers scrambled. Monitors flickered. Microphones hissed. At home, across living rooms and nursing homes, Americans sat forward in their recliners, jaw clenched, heart racing. Jasmine Crockett shot to her feet so fast, her chair nearly toppled. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. AOC didn't move, but her head lowered ever so slightly. Her eyes darted towards the floor, blinking hard, as if trying to process the words before the weight of them crush her public composure. The camera snapped to Vanessa Hart. She blinked just once, then turned back to Patel. Her voice was still steady, but the edges had sharpened. Director Patel, are you accusing sitting members of Congress of breaching national security? Live television, Patel didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply sat back in his chair, folded his hands, and said, "What the American people deserve is transparency." That's when the shouting began. Gasps turned to whispers. Whispers turned to murmurs. The audience broke out into chaotic voices, some cheering, others yelling, "Show the proof!" Cell phones lit up like fireflies, as clips were already being recorded, sent, and shared. Within minutes, Patel's words would echo in every corner of the country. And yet, in that chaos, 3 figures remained locked in a triangle of tension. Crockett was breathing hard, every ounce of restraint fighting the urge to explode. AOC hadn't moved since the bombshell dropped. Her eyes now focused directly on Patel. Not blinking, not panicked, just focused, like a pressure cooker sealed tight. And Patel simply waited. Vanessa Hart leaned forward slightly, voice cutting through the noise like a gavel. This is no longer a discussion. It's a national reckoning. On screen, the graphic changed. FBI versus Congress, explosive accusations live. What had begun as a debate was now a detonation. And no matter where you stood, left, right, or undecided, one thing was certain. This wasn't just politics. It was war. And it had just begun. The air inside the face-off studio, already taut from Kash Patel's bombshell, now ignited into a full-blown firestorm. Jasmine Crockett didn't hesitate. She launched to her feet as if her chair had scorched her. Her voice cut through the tension like a siren at midnight. "You dare accuse me on national television without proof," she thundered. "You're not a director. You're a bully in a suit." The words echoed fierce and unforgiving. Her southern cadence sharpened by fury. Crockett wasn't speaking for herself anymore. She was channeling the fire of every voter back home who'd clawed their way up from the margins just like she had. And tonight, that fire had a voice. Across from her, Patel didn't blink. He didn't even lift his chin. The stillness made him more menacing, like a predator, letting its prey burn itself out before the final strike. Then, slow measured AOC rose. She didn't yell. She didn't shake. Her calm was more unnerving than Crockett's fury. "Mr. Patel," she said, voice low and deliberate. "Are you accusing elected officials of treason on live television?" Every syllable was precise, controlled, like a knife being set on a courtroom table, sharp, but not yet used. The audience hushed. Even the cameras still rolling seemed to draw in closer. A beat of silence passed. Then Vanessa Hart, always the professional, lifted her hand gently, signaling for control. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said firmly, "let's keep the temperature below boiling." Too late. The tension had already boiled over. Crockett's jaw clenched, her fingers visibly gripping the hem of her blazer like a tether. She wasn't done. Her voice returned louder, hotter. "You don't get to smear people with zero evidence just because your party lost control of the narrative. I come from Dallas. I've fought for schools, for housing, for law enforcement reform. And you," she jabbed a finger across the table, "sit here playing FBI like it's a campaign stunt." The audience stirred again. Applause burst from one corner. Boos rose from another. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing something was unraveling, and maybe not just politically. AOC turned her eyes to Vanessa, then back to Patel. She spoke with a cold steadiness that betrayed how tightly she was holding the line. "Let's be clear. If you have evidence, release it. If not, this is character assassination, live, weaponized, and disgraceful." Patel, still seated like a statue of resolve, finally spoke again. "The Bureau does not discuss ongoing investigations. But I will say this: Americans have the right to know when patterns emerge, when public officials engage in communications that raise red flags. We're not talking about politics. We're talking about national integrity." He paused. "Let it hang. And the integrity is cracking." Crockett's eyes narrowed. "You don't scare me," she said, voice low but quaking. "I've stood up to worse than this." But her grip had tightened. Her breath had shortened. The fury hadn't faded. It had transformed into something sharper dread. The kind that settles in when the accusation isn't just loud. It might be believable. AOC reached over not to stop Crockett, but to steady her. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. The camera caught it in perfect frame, one congresswoman grasping the wrist of another, not in fear, but in solidarity. Vanessa leaned in from the center, voice composed, but darkened with urgency. "Director Patel, you've made a severe allegation. You've rattled the table tonight. Before we move on, I must ask, have formal charges been filed?" "No," Patel said simply. "But they might be," and with that the oxygen seemed to leave the room. What began as a policy panel had transformed into a high-stakes showdown, a televised interrogation that blurred the line between truth and performance, justice and ambition. For viewers across America, especially those who'd seen political scandal unravel before Watergate, Iran-Contra Benghazi, this felt familiar. But there was something new here, something colder. Because tonight, it wasn't about what happened. It was about who America would believe. And for Jasmine Crockett and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the cost of that belief had just gone up. The tension was already suffocating. But Kash Patel hadn't even begun. He sat forward again, this time slower, more deliberate, like a prosecutor taking the final step toward a conviction. His voice cold and precise, sliced clean through the crackling studio air. We've intercepted internal communications emails, encrypted chats between staffers in both of your offices, and foreign-linked media entities. Silence. Vanessa Hart's eyes narrowed. She didn't blink. Her voice dropped a full octave as she asked the question now vibrating in millions of living rooms across America. Director Patel, are you accusing these two members of Congress of collaborating with foreign agents? For a moment, it felt as if time paused. Kash Patel leaned back, his posture steady as marble. His next words were slower, sharper, each one a nail driven into the table between them. Not just collaborating, amplifying narratives that weaken national cohesion. The effect was instantaneous. The audience didn't gasp this time, they just froze. You could have heard a pin drop. No coughing, no shifting, not even the soft hum of the overhead lights. It felt less like a studio now, and more like a federal hearing. A courtroom without a gavel, and two elected women seated beneath a national accusation. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak, not yet. Her hand still folded on the table twitched. Her eyes didn't leave Patel's, but her jaw was clenched tight, the tendons in her neck drawn like steel cables. AOC, still standing, inhaled slowly. Her voice, when it returned, was calm but heavier, like someone bracing to hold the weight of the Constitution on their shoulders. That's a serious allegation, Director Patel, and the way you're delivering it on live TV with no evidence presented isn't just reckless, it's dangerous. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her restraint was the power. But Patel wasn't rattled. He didn't shift in his seat, didn't flinch under the lights. He spoke again, low, confident, surgical. The American people deserve to know when elected officials or their staff are in contact with groups known to push disinformation that aligns with hostile foreign interests. That's not speculation. That's national security. Vanessa Hart's tone now matched the weight of the moment. Her face no longer resembled that of a TV host. She looked more like a federal mediator. Do you have any evidence? Director dates messages. Specific links. Patel paused for the first time, just long enough to let the silence throb. Some of that evidence is classified, but I can confirm that encrypted communications were traced back to staffers working for both Congresswoman Crockett and Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. The content and timing of those messages raise serious concerns. This was no longer theater. This was war. Crockett stood up now, finally. Her voice no longer thundered. It was tighter, more surgical, but just as lethal. Let me tell you what's really weakening this country, using the FBI like a campaign ad. Smearing women of color on national television, while hiding behind classified smoke and mirrors. She leaned forward, steadying herself on the table. Her voice hardened. If you had real proof, you'd bring it to court, not to prime time. Scattered applause erupted in the crowd. Some stood, some booed. But one thing was clear, the room was no longer neutral. It had divided, and so had the nation. AOC stepped forward beside Crockett, eyes locked on Patel. We've seen this before. Blacklists, witch hunts, manufactured fear. We stand here today not because we're guilty, but because we're inconvenient to those in power. Patel's expression didn't change, but something in the room did. You could feel the weight of America's history bearing down McCarthyism. COINTELPRO, church committee hearings. Older viewers watching from home had lived through it before, and now they were seeing the pattern repeat. But Patel wasn't finished. We are pursuing leads. Some of them are actionable, and the Bureau will not stop until every question has an answer. Vanessa tried to reel the moment in her voice calm, but loaded director. If these accusations prove false, what damage will be left behind? Another silence. Patel's response was cold, and if they prove true, what damage are we already living in? The air cracked, not with sound, but with dread. Crockett looked away for the first time all night. Just for a second. Her voice, when it returned, was lower, gritted. You better hope you're wrong, Director, because if you're not, then this country is in deeper trouble than any of us imagined. The camera panned out slowly. 3 figures under blazing lights. A divided nation watching in real time. And somewhere deep in Washington, D.C., phones were already ringing off the hook. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about trust. And tonight, America wasn't sure where to place it. The studio lights still burned overhead, but the temperature had shifted. What began as a verbal clash now turned personal, raw, exposed human. The camera moved in. AOC's eyes dropped, and for the first time that night, the facade cracked. Her lower lashes shimmered with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Her jaw clenched as she forced the emotion back down her shoulders square, despite the storm behind her gaze. It wasn't fear, it was heartbreak. Not just for herself, but for what the accusation had done to the office. She built the trust she fought for in Queens, the movement she tried to embody. She whispered only 4 words too low for the mic, but caught on camera. This isn't who we are. Beside her, Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. Her stare drilled into the center lens like a bullet through glass. She didn't look at Patel. She didn't look at Vanessa. She looked straight into the homes of every American watching. Dallas, she said. Voice steady, deliberate. I've never betrayed you. There was no fury now, no shouting, just a deadly stillness. A woman who knew the cameras might be lying, the headlines might twist, but her people knew her story, and she was speaking to them, not Washington. Backstage, panic bloomed like wildfire. 2 young aides from AOC's team huddled around a phone, eyes wide, as texts poured in. The group chat pinged non-stop clips, already trending screen recordings of Patel's accusation slicing through the internet like a chainsaw. Patch foreign leaker, AOC Crockett. Treason and FBI storm were exploding across platforms. At the same time, our stand with AOC and the Dallas daughter were climbing the charts. In the hallway behind the stage, aides from multiple congressional offices whispered urgently. A senior staffer on Crockett's team paced with his phone to his ear, saying, "We need legal review. Now." Another sprinted down the corridor to flag the Ethics Committee's liaison. The Capitol, though silent from the outside, was vibrating inside like a hornet's nest. Meanwhile, TV producers behind the glass scrambled to rework commercial segments. An editor leaned in. "We've got Patel's full statement clean. Let's push it now with a banner." Within minutes, networks outside the studio had their own spin. Fox News. Breaking FBI Director links AOC Crockett to foreign leaks. CNN Patel goes rogue. Unproven accusations shake Congress. MSNBC Live damage. Political targeting underway in prime time. What the audience didn't see was the silent collapse happening in the back corridors of government. Phones at the House Oversight Committee began ringing non-stop. Senate aides reached out for clarification. A private Slack channel lit up among intelligence officials. Did he just go public with the leak probe? The stakes were now beyond TV. This wasn't just political theater. It was a national fracture line exposed in high definition. Back on stage, Vanessa Hart's voice returned softer but sharper than ever. Director Patel, Congresswoman Crockett, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. This moment is bigger than any one headline. The nation is watching, and it's listening not just to your words, but your silence. AOC looked up. The fire returned to her eyes, not in rage, but resolve. She turned to Patel, voice barely above a whisper, but mic'd perfectly. You talk about national security, but you've endangered it. You've dragged our names into something you know isn't proven, and you've done it not in a hearing, not in a closed briefing, but here in front of millions. Crockett took a half step forward, speaking now like a daughter of the South, but a warrior of the Hill. This is no longer about us. This is about how power gets used, and you've made one thing very clear tonight. Director, when you don't have the truth, you go looking for a target. Vanessa glanced at the floor director. She got the cue. They were running long, but no one dared cut away. This wasn't just news. It was a rupture in real time. A live unraveling of dignity, politics, and perception. And the hardest part wasn't what was said. It was what would happen after. The silence didn't last long. The emotions boiling beneath the surface erupted again, but this time with a different tone. Not reactionary, not defensive. Deliberate. Because now it wasn't just about disproving an accusation. It was about defending identity, legacy, and truth under fire. Jasmine Crockett didn't wait for another cue. She stepped forward with the weight of generations behind her, her voice cutting through the air like steel, dragged across concrete. You're not investigating extremists, Director. You're silencing black women who don't bow. A tremor passed through the audience, not from volume, but from resonance. That wasn't just rhetoric. It was a wound one reopened on national television for all of America to see. You could feel the shift in the room from scandal to reckoning. Crockett's words weren't just for Patel. They were for Dallas, for every voter who'd stood beside her when cameras weren't rolling, for every grandmother who'd told her, "Don't back down, baby, not now." Across from her, Patel remained still, only the faintest smirk forming at the corners of his mouth. Not amused, strategic. He was watching it unfold, exactly as predicted. Emotion surging the accused, stepping into the spotlight. The narrative tightening around raw identity and rage. But he hadn't counted on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepping in with surgical precision. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her voice was low and even, but laced with fire. You talk about national unity, Mr. Patel. Look at your boss, a man who led an insurrection and shattered the very institutions you claim to defend. The line landed hard. The crowd gasped. Social media exploded. But AOC didn't blink. She turned slightly to the camera, anchoring her message for the country beyond the studio. Don't lecture us about patriotism when your loyalty is to a man, not the Constitution. Patel's cold smile deepened. He let the silence stretch just long enough to sharpen the edge of his response. And yet I'm the one following the law, he said, voice smooth and unhurried. What are you two following? It was a rhetorical blade honed to pierce not just Crockett and AOC, but the very idea of moral superiority. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Ethics versus enforcement, identity versus institution. The tension snapped back to full throttle. Crockett leaned into the mic, her voice raw but controlled. What we follow is the people, their struggle, their needs, their future. You follow orders. Her eyes didn't leave his. She wasn't backing down. Patel replied, quiet as a gavel. and orders are what keep this nation from falling into chaos. AOC stepped in, hands at her side, her voice almost mournful. Law without justice is tyranny, Director, and justice without truth. That's how democracies die. You could hear chairs shifting in the audience. This wasn't debate anymore. It was philosophy colliding with power. Vanessa Hart, still poised, but visibly shaken, leaned forward. Her voice was nearly a whisper. We're watching a moment that history will replay on both sides. And when this night ends, Americans will ask themselves, who stood for truth? And who stood in the way of it? The lights in the studio seemed to dim, not physically, but emotionally. A chill washed over the set. Because beneath every word now was an unspoken question. What if both sides were right, and still completely lost? Crockett's voice returned one last time, sharp and low. You can take everything from me, reputation, platform, re-election, but you won't take my voice. Not tonight. AOC nodded beside her. Silent. Fierce. Her presence alone answered Patel's question. The studio didn't clap. No cheers. No boos. Just a heavy quiet, the kind that follows something irreversible. And Kash Patel. He didn't need to say more. He'd already done what he came to do. He didn't come to argue. He came to accuse, and to see whether the nation would blink. It hadn't, but it had broken just enough. By the time the studio lights dimmed, and the closing credits of Face Off rolled, America wasn't watching television anymore. It was watching itself fractured, inflamed, and spiraling into a full-blown reckoning. Within 30 minutes, every major network had jumped on the moment. No one waited for fact-checkers. No one waited for context. The Patel accusation, the Crockett defiance, the AOC counterstrike, it all exploded into the digital bloodstream of the nation. Fox News ran the banner first. Blazing red across the bottom of the screen. FBI Director drops treason bomb on AOC and Crockett. Their primetime hosts didn't waste time softening it. One commentator leaned into the camera, eyebrows raised with performative disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, this is beyond politics. This is national betrayal. The question now is, who helped them? And how far did the leaks go? Clips from the broadcast were chopped into bite-sized outrage segments. Patel's line. We have intercepted encrypted communications played on loop as anchors demanded congressional suspension pending investigation. Across the media battlefield, MSNBC fired back with a headline, just as charged political persecution reaches new low FBI now targets women of color. A primetime panel featured former Justice Department officials calling Patel's actions unprecedented abuse and a calculated hit job. One guest declared, "This is not national security. This is national theater. And women like Crockett and AOC are paying the price for being too loud, too unafraid, and too effective." The temperature online boiling. On X Twitter, hashtags exploded. FBI abuse trending at number 3 nationwide within an hour. Expose them boosted by conservative influencers and former officials. I stand with Crockett picked up by civil rights groups and progressive PACs. What did AOC do ambiguous enough to go viral from both ends of the spectrum? Viral clips were everywhere. One showed AOC's tear-filled stare into the floor paired with slow piano music, and the caption, "This is what injustice looks like." Another from a far-right account froze on Crockett's line. "You're silencing black women who don't bow," framing it as a defensive race card. Both had over 3 million views by sunrise. Then came the money. Donors began moving fast. According to an anonymous source close to AOC's campaign, 3 major funders reached out within 12 hours, requesting temporary distance until clarity is achieved. One national labor union paused digital ads in Queens. A Dallas tech firm that had previously endorsed Crockett suspended public contributions, citing serious national allegations requiring full transparency. The optics were bleeding. Even neutral political analysts began raising alarm bells. On an independent Substack show, one respected former senator summed it up bluntly. "We are entering a zone where accusation equals conviction in the public mind. It's dangerous, irreversible." Meanwhile, Patel remained silent. No press conference, no new statement. He let the fire speak for him. The FBI's official spokesperson issued a single-line comment. Director Patel's remarks reflect the seriousness with which the Bureau investigates all potential internal threats to national security. It didn't help. At Crockett's district office, reporters gathered like storm clouds. Her team barricaded from press, while grassroots supporters held up handmade signs reading, "We believe Jasmine and Dallas stands tall." In Queens, a candlelight rally emerged outside AOC's campaign office. Elderly Puerto Rican voters, many lifelong supporters, stood shoulder to shoulder with college students. It was 9:47 p.m. when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went live on her social media account. No lights, no makeup. Just her face bare, steady, tired, but sharper than ever. The comments poured in by the thousands, but she didn't flinch. She didn't smile, and she didn't read the chat. She simply looked into the lens and said, "If telling the truth is treason, then this nation is losing its soul." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. She spoke slowly, deliberately, not as a congresswoman, not as a headline, but as someone who knew what it meant to be misjudged, misquoted, and misunderstood. She didn't rebut the accusations point by point. She didn't name Patel. She didn't even defend herself directly. Instead, she told a story about a grandmother in Queens who had to skip medication to pay rent, about a high school kid who got his first job through a youth program she fought to fund, about the hundreds of town halls she held, where no cameras showed up, but people did. People with questions, fears, and hope. "You can't measure loyalty to America by who you vote for," she said softly. "You measure it by who you fight for when no one's watching." Across the country, thousands watched, many in silence, some in tears, some skeptical, but listening. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stood before a small community crowd in South Dallas. The room was nothing fancy, just a rec center gym with flickering fluorescents and folding chairs. But every seat was filled. Some folks stood along the wall, and every face was turned to her. She wore no blazer, no podium, just a long-sleeve black shirt and the weight of the moment. I didn't leak anything she said, her voice trembling for the first time all week. But if they fear my voice, it's because it echoes too loud for them to ignore. A pause, a breath. Then the voice grew stronger. They say national security is at risk, but I say silence is a bigger threat. Because if public service becomes a target, who will still step up to serve? Someone in the back shouted, "You will." Applause erupted, not like a rally, but like a family reunion. After a hard storm, no slogans, just trust. That moment, Crockett lit by phone screens, AOC live streaming in the dark, became viral before it even ended. Split-screen images of both women speaking truth in solitude filled social feeds. Commentators called it the midnight resistance. Some mocked it. But even critics admitted something real had happened that night. Not a defense, a declaration. News outlets scrambled to catch up. CNN aired the live stream. Fox replayed it with commentary. MSNBC labeled it the most human moment of the year. But none of that mattered to the women themselves. They weren't talking to anchors anymore. They were talking to you, the voter who remembered Watergate, who lived through Vietnam, who watched the Challenger fall and 9/11 rise, who knew what real sacrifice looked like and how easily the word patriot could be twisted to suit the speaker. To that audience, especially those over 65, this wasn't just generational drama. It was a gut check. It was Eisenhower's warning against unchecked power. It was McCarthyism in a new suit. Crockett and AOC weren't perfect. They never claimed to be. But in that hour, they weren't politicians. They were voices refusing to vanish. And the country splintered. Cynical, divided, paused just long enough to hear them. Because truth, even whispered, has a way of echoing louder in the dark. It was past midnight when the final image hit the airwaves. Not of a podium, not of applause, but of a man standing alone. Kash Patel, stoic, unreadable, stood in his office atop FBI headquarters. In his right hand, a thick folder marked confidential. Active case. The seal of the Bureau pressed in red across the cover. No leaks, no cameras, just silence and strategy. He stared out the window over Washington, D.C. The Capitol dome glowed faintly in the distance, less a beacon, now more a battlefield. Patel said nothing, but his slight smile said everything. This wasn't about winning a debate. It was about positioning pieces. And last night, he'd moved his queen. Down below, the nation remained in motion, social media, still roaring, pundits, still spinning. But something had shifted. Not just headlines. Not just approval ratings. Trust. The real currency of democracy had been shaken. In living rooms across America, viewers processed what they'd witnessed, not just the clash of Crockett, AOC, and Patel, but what it meant. To older Americans, many of whom had lived through times when power was abused and voices were silenced, this moment didn't feel new. It felt familiar. That's why it struck so deep. Because this wasn't about who yelled louder. It was about who understood fear and how to wield it. And no one made that clearer than Vanessa Hart, who returned to the camera one final time as the studio lights dimmed. She didn't smile. She didn't soften her tone. She spoke as if delivering a eulogy for something we hadn't realized we'd lost. Tonight wasn't just a debate. It was a warning shot across the face of American democracy. She let it hang, no flourish, no outro music. Just truth, cold and unchikinased. Back in Dallas, Crockett sat quietly in her car outside the rec center, scrolling through the hashtags. In Queens, AOC leaned over her laptop, reading messages from single moms, retired veterans, and immigrants, all asking the same thing: what happens next? And in the middle of all that uncertainty, the message was crystal clear. The one who controls fear controls the country. The game had changed, and everyone, Patel, Crockett, AOC, and every American watching knew it. Because truth may inspire. But fear moves nations. In a time when politics often feels like theater, and truth is filtered through headlines, this story reminds us of something deeper. Fear is a tool, and silence is a choice. What happened between Kash Patel, AOC, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't just about accusations. It was about how power tests character and how courage responds. For Americans over 60, this isn't new. You've seen what happens when government overreaches, when media becomes a weapon, and when public trust breaks apart. From Watergate to the Church Committee, you know the cost of unchecked power and the importance of asking hard questions. This story reminds us that defending democracy doesn't always happen in courtrooms. Sometimes it happens on live TV, sometimes in a candlelit community hall, and sometimes it begins when someone like you says, "I see what's happening, and I won't look away." If this story made you feel something, anger, concern, or hope, comment below. I remember what real accountability looks like. And don't forget to subscribe, because this fight for truth isn't over, and your voice still matters.